Hey, creepy crew. There is a very convenient way to imagine danger in the wilderness. Something dramatic appears, everybody immediately understands what is happening, and from that point on, the problem is simply to survive it. Unfortunately, real life is much less organized. Most bad situations begin with something completely ordinary: a roof in the rain, a camera lying 3 steps away, a coworker standing 30 feet down a road, a trail that is visible uphill. And this is what connects today's stories. None of these people walked into the woods looking for trouble. In fact, several of them were doing something that for a few seconds looked perfectly reasonable. The problem is that nature does not care whether the decision looked reasonable from where you were standing. A place can look abandoned and still belong to somebody. Ground can look solid and be boiling underneath. An animal can change targets in a second. A harmless-looking slope can remove your easiest escape route. So today, 4 stories about the moment when the obvious explanation stops working, and what happens immediately after. I fish the canals around Big Cypress pretty often, enough that there are a few places I use as landmarks, without even thinking about it anymore. One of them was this old hunting camp, right off the water. I had no clue who owned it. I just passed it so many times over the years that eventually it became part of the scenery. I'd never seen anybody there. No boat tied up, nobody on the dock. The place looked old enough that I guess I filled in the rest myself. Weathered boards, a dock that sagged a little, that kind of thing. I wasn't studying it every time I passed either. It was just one of those places that slowly turns into part of your mental map. And after enough trips, I started thinking of it as abandoned, without ever really deciding that. This was during the summer. I was out fishing alone in a small open boat when one of those storms came in fast. The sky went dark, and then the rain started coming down hard, with the wind chopping up the canal and throwing water at me sideways. It wasn't some survival situation. I was just getting soaked and knocked around enough that sitting there in an open boat, when I knew there was a roof nearby, felt kind of stupid. That old camp was the closest cover, so I went over to it. I didn't stand there weighing the pros and cons or anything. In my head, nobody used the place. I figured I'd tie off, wait maybe a few minutes for the worst of the rain to pass, then get back on the water. I eased up next to the dock, looped my line around one of the posts, and climbed out. I was soaked through by then anyway. The rain was beating on the roof hard enough that it drowned out most other sound. And at that point, I was mostly annoyed at myself for getting caught in it. I opened the door and went inside. The camp looked about like I expected. One cramped room, old furniture, boxes and junk that seemed like it had been sitting there forever. It smelled damp and closed up. Nothing about it made me stop or think I shouldn't be there. I remember that pretty clearly because I wasn't nervous when I went in. I wasn't sneaking around or trying to be quiet. As far as I was concerned, I was just getting out of the rain for a few minutes. I stayed near the front of the room and kept an eye on the weather. After a little while, I noticed a cot against one wall. The cot itself didn't mean anything, obviously. What stood out was the sheet. It wasn't new, but it was a lot cleaner than everything around it. Not what I'd expect from something that had supposedly been sitting untouched through years of South Florida humidity. Then I noticed a towel hanging up to dry. Same thing. Nothing weird about a towel, but it didn't look like some old rag that had been forgotten there for years. Once I'd noticed that much, I started paying more attention to the room instead of the rain. There were old supplies on a shelf, but mixed in with them was food that looked normal and current, not something that had been sitting there forever. Near the wall, I saw a pair of boots, and there was still wet mud around the soles. That was probably the detail that made all the other little things stop feeling random. Written out like that, I know it can sound like I'm building up a bunch of creepy clues, but it really wasn't like that. None of this stuff was scary. It was normal stuff. That was actually the issue. Normal stuff meant somebody was using the place. I didn't keep searching after that. I already knew enough to understand that my original assumption was probably wrong. Somebody had been using it recently enough that I had no business standing there, treating it like some public shelter. I had no idea who, though. I didn't know when the boots had last been worn, or whether one person used the place or several. I didn't know if anybody was anywhere close. With the rain still coming down that hard, I couldn't tell much about what was happening outside beyond the dock and the canal. And nobody had done anything to me. Nobody had spoken to me, and I wasn't trapped in there. I think that's part of why the feeling was so awkward, more than anything else. There wasn't a threat I could point to. I was just suddenly very aware that I had walked into somebody else's place without permission, because I'd spent years turning "I've never seen anyone there" into "nobody uses it." Those sound like the same thing, until you're standing inside, with your boat tied to their dock a long way from the road, and you have no idea where whoever uses the place actually is. That was enough for me. A few minutes earlier, staying under that roof had felt like the sensible choice. The rain was still coming down hard, and the canal was still rough, so getting back in the boat didn't suddenly become pleasant. Nothing outside had improved. The calculation had just flipped for me. Getting soaked again seemed less uncomfortable than waiting around in a place I now knew wasn't mine to be in. I wasn't interested in finding out anything else. I left the rest of the place alone and went back out into the rain. I walked down the dock, got to the boat, and worked the wet line loose from the post. My hands were slick, but it came free. I climbed back in and pushed away. The weather hadn't improved much. Rain was still hitting me in the face, and the wind made the ride uncomfortable. But I kept going and put some distance between myself and the camp. I was wet again almost immediately, which at that point felt like a pretty fair trade. And that was basically it. Nobody came after me. I never saw whoever used the camp, and I never had any contact with them. I left the same way I came in, under my own power, with nothing stopping me. I never went back. I never asked around, trying to figure out who owned the place either. I probably could have. Big Cypress isn't some completely cut-off world, and people who use those camps tend to know other people who use them. But I didn't really see what I would gain from turning my own bad assumption into some kind of investigation. I also never learned anything later that made whoever used the camp seem dangerous. For all I know, it belonged to a completely normal person who came out there every so often, and kept a few things there. I don't even know if all the stuff I saw belonged to one person. Whoever used that place may never have known I was inside. That's what still bothers me a little, and honestly, it's mostly because it's embarrassing. I wasn't scared because I knew some dangerous person was nearby. I didn't know that at all. I was uncomfortable because I finally understood I was the stranger in somebody else's place, and I'd been way too sure it was abandoned, just because I'd never happened to see whoever used it. The interesting part of this story is that absolutely nothing supernatural happened. No armed owner appeared in the doorway. Nobody chased the narrator down the canal. There was no secret room, no threatening message, no dramatic reveal. There was a clean sheet, a towel, fresh food, muddy boots, and suddenly the entire meaning of the building changed. That is actually why the story works. He had not discovered danger. He had discovered that his assumption was false. For years, "I never see anybody there," quietly became "nobody uses this place." These are not the same statement, but our brains are very good at turning repetition into certainty. Pass the same empty dock 50 times, and eventually it stops being somebody's property in your head. It becomes scenery. Then one wet pair of boots destroys the theory. And notice what he does next. He leaves before finding out whether the owner is friendly, hostile, nearby, or miles away. That is the sensible part. Once the premise changes, the decision changes with it. The storm did not become safer. The canal did not become calmer. He simply realized that being soaked in his own boat was preferable to testing an assumption he had already gotten wrong once. I was working a seasonal job in Yellowstone that summer, but this happened on one of my days off. I wasn't in uniform or doing anything work-related. I was just walking one of the thermal boardwalks, like everybody else. Working there had made one thing pretty automatic for me, though. You don't step off the boardwalk in those areas. Even when the ground right next to it looks dry and solid, that doesn't mean it actually is. There was a family a few yards ahead of me. One of them, A young guy had a camera in his hand. I didn't know them, and I hadn't really been paying attention to them until he dropped it over the barrier. It landed close, maybe only a few steps out. And honestly, I can understand why that distance mattered. There wasn't a big pool of boiling water sitting between him and the camera, or anything obvious like that. The ground was pale gray, kind of rough and crusty looking, but from the boardwalk it looked walkable. Someone told him not to go over. I looked up when I heard that, and he was already climbing past the boundary. I remember starting to think I should say something too, but he moved before I really had time to do much about it. He took one step, then another. Both were fine. Then his right leg dropped through the surface, almost to his thigh. My first thought was actually that he'd just stepped into soft mud and gotten stuck. It happened that fast. He dropped down and caught himself with his hands, and then he screamed, not yelled because he was startled. He screamed like he was badly hurt. Once he reacted like that, it was obvious the ground had broken through under him, and there was hot mud underneath. He was trying to get his weight off that leg, but there wasn't really a good way for him to do it. His other foot was still on the same kind of ground, and nobody knew what part of it would hold if he shifted. I could see dark, wet stuff around the hole where the crust had broken, but that was about it. I didn't know how deep it was, or what the ground around him would do. I just knew I wasn't going to walk out there. Everything around us got noisy at once. People started talking over each other. Somebody was pulling out a phone. Someone else was telling the guy not to move any more than he had to. I was still looking at him when his mother moved. I only knew she was his mother because of what she was yelling. She was almost right next to me, and there wasn't any hesitation. Her son was a few yards away, screaming, and she went straight for the barrier. I don't mean she stopped and decided the rule didn't apply to her. It wasn't like that. She just reacted, and the ground between them still looked solid, which I think is part of what made the whole thing so dangerous. She got a hand on the barrier and started bringing herself over it. I was close enough that I didn't really think first. I grabbed her around the waist and pulled her backward onto the boardwalk. She immediately tried to get away from me, not to fight me exactly. She was just trying to get to him. She kept reaching forward and telling me to let her go. I remember saying, "You can't go out there, it doesn't hold." I probably said it more than once. There wasn't much else I could say. She twisted hard enough that I had to shift my grip, and after that I basically stopped trying to explain anything. Her son was still right there, only a few yards away. Other people were calling for help and trying to keep him from moving around too much, but I couldn't do anything for his leg from where I was, and stepping out to him wasn't an option. So I held on to her. For the next few minutes, that was pretty much my entire role in what was happening. She stopped trying to wrench herself free, but she stayed leaned forward toward him, tense the whole time. Whenever he moved or cried out, I could feel her body tighten again, like she might try to go. I kept telling her to stay on the boardwalk. I wasn't trying to give her some safety lecture. I just didn't know what else to tell somebody whose son was sitting a few yards away hurt, while I was physically stopping her from going to him. That part felt awful. He was so close that every normal instinct said somebody should just go help him, but the whole reason he was hurt was that the ground couldn't be trusted. Other people were doing what they could. Help had been called, and a few people were talking to him and telling him to stay put. I wasn't really following everything they were saying because most of my attention was on his mother and whether she was going to try to climb over again. When park staff and responders got there, things changed pretty quickly from my end. They started taking over the area and talking directly to the family and the people closest to the scene. I didn't let go of her the second they appeared. I waited until it was clear she was staying on the boardwalk and wasn't about to move around me. Then I let go and stepped back. I didn't help get her son out. I wasn't trained for that, and there were people there who were. I also didn't stand there trying to watch every part of it. Some of what happened I couldn't see clearly anyway, and even if I had, I wouldn't know enough about that kind of rescue to explain it without guessing. Later, through work, I heard that the guy survived. He had serious burns on the leg that went through the surface. I never found out exactly what treatment he needed or how long his recovery took. His mother wasn't physically hurt. There wasn't another accident after that. The part I keep going back to is actually his mother, not the moment his leg went through. She was leaning toward him with almost her whole body, and I had both arms around her waist, trying to keep her weight on the boardwalk. Her son was right there, and I couldn't do anything for him. I don't think of that as me saving the family or anything like that. I didn't save her son. The only thing I know I did was keep his mother from going where she was trying to go. There is a particularly nasty feature of thermal areas. They can punish the exact instinct that usually helps in an emergency. Somebody is hurt, so you go to them. Your child is screaming 3 yards away, so of course you move towards your child. In almost every normal situation, hesitation would look cruel. Here, hesitation is what keeps the accident from becoming 2 accidents. The young man makes the first mistake because the camera is close and the surface looks solid. Then his mother nearly makes the second mistake for a much stronger reason. Her son is already injured. The visual information is still lying to her in exactly the same way. The ground between them looks walkable. It has just demonstrated in public that it may not be. And that leaves the narrator with an awful job. He cannot rescue the son. He cannot make the burns disappear. He can only physically stop a mother from doing what every part of her body is telling her to do. That is not a heroic movie moment. It is much more unpleasant than that. Sometimes the useful action is not advancing toward the emergency. Sometimes it is preventing one more person from entering it. In Yellowstone, a few feet of apparently boring gray ground can be the entire difference. Devin died on a work site outside North Bend, and I was the one who came back. I've had to tell this a few times now, first through work and then to wildlife people, so I know the order of it pretty well. I know where we were standing and roughly how far apart we were. The part I keep getting stuck on isn't the cougar hitting me, it's what I was yelling at Devin while I was on the ground. We were seasonal field workers. Most days we drove Forest Service roads and stopped wherever there was a culvert problem or a washed out shoulder, then either handled the small stuff or marked it for a bigger crew. That day was normal, up until it wasn't. We had the truck, our packs, and the usual field gear. I kept one of the handheld radios clipped to the outside strap of my pack, because I didn't want to dig for it every time. Devin had the bear spray. We'd worked together enough that we weren't right beside each other every second. On a short stretch, one of us might be checking the ditch, while the other went a little farther up the road. We were still close enough to talk or yell if we needed to. At one stop, I was on the uphill side looking at where water had cut into the road near a culvert. I was mostly looking down. Devin was farther back down the road, and then he called my name in a way that made me stand up immediately. He told me to back up. At first, I had no idea what he was looking at. He started clapping and shouting and pointing above me. I saw brush move on the slope before I saw the animal itself. Once I did, there wasn't really any question. It was a cougar, above the road and partly in the trees. I backed toward Devin. We didn't finish the inspection, and we didn't try to get closer or take a picture or anything like that. We were done with that section. We started back toward the truck, along the more open part of the road. Devin told me to keep an eye on the uphill side. I said we should just call the rest of the stop and leave, so we walked. For about 15 minutes, as best as I can remember, nothing else happened. The road rolled enough that we weren't keeping exactly the same pace, and Devin was quicker than me anyway. By the time we got around another bend, he'd opened maybe 30 or 40 feet between us. That didn't seem strange at the time. I could still see him, and we were both going the same direction. The uphill side there was steeper and thick with brush. I looked down because the gravel was loose, caught movement above me, and barely got my head turned. The cougar came off the slope and hit me before I could get myself around. The first grab caught a lot of my pack, which is probably part of why I wasn't hurt worse right then, but it still drove me hard onto the road. I landed twisted, with one arm trapped underneath me and the pack shoved up around my shoulders. I tried to roll enough to get that arm out and couldn't get any leverage. Pushing with my legs just scraped me sideways in the loose gravel. I had my free hand around my head and neck because I didn't know what else to do. There was weight across my back and shoulder, and I couldn't get my knees underneath me. Devin was down the road with the spray in his hand. From where he was, I was basically underneath the cougar, and the angle was bad. He was yelling. I don't remember every word. What I do remember is him saying he couldn't get the spray on it from there and be sure where it would go. I tried again to get my arm loose and got nowhere. My face was against the gravel for a second, then I managed to turn enough to breathe without opening up my neck as much. By then, I was panicking. I wasn't calmly working anything out. I wanted the cougar off me, and Devin was standing there with the one thing we had that might do it. So I started yelling at him to come closer. I know I said it more than once, because I remember my throat hurting. Get closer, Devin. Use the spray. Come closer and spray it. He didn't move right away. He had the canister up and was trying to find some kind of angle from where he stood. I could see him shift and stop. I kept telling him to come closer. I wasn't thinking about what that meant for him. In my head, it was just, the spray isn't reaching from there, so get closer. Then he started up the road. He wasn't running. He came toward us with the canister raised, closing the distance carefully. I still had my free arm over my head. When the weight on my back changed, the cougar lifted enough that my pack loosened. For half a second, I thought maybe Devin had managed to spray it. Then it turned away from me and went at him. He was only a few yards away by then. He barely had time to brace before it hit him and knocked him down close to where he'd stopped. I remember the spray leaving his hand. After that, I can't give some clean play-by-play because I didn't see one. I was still on the ground, my arm was numbed, and every time I tried to push myself up, my shoulder gave out. I could move away, barely. I dragged myself sideways until there was some distance between me and them. My pack was twisted but still on me, and I reached back with my good hand and found the radio clipped to the outside strap. I got an emergency call out. I have no idea how I sounded. I gave our location as best I could and said we'd been attacked and Devin was down. The person answering kept me talking long enough to make sure they had where we were. I kept watching Devin while I did it. I couldn't go back to him. I could barely get onto my knees, and the cougar was still right there with him. There wasn't a way for me to pull Devin away without putting myself right back under it. Eventually, it moved off far enough that I could see Devin better. I called his name. He didn't answer. The work response got there after the attack itself was over. Nobody arrived in time to scare the cougar off or get between it and neither of us. By the time they reached us, that part was done. They got me off the site, and I was treated for the injuries from being knocked down and grabbed. Devin was dead. There wasn't some big official explanation afterward. A wildlife officer later told me that another person moving closer could have changed what the cougar was paying attention to. He was careful about it. He said that was something that could have happened. Not that anybody knew exactly why it switched from me to Devin. I get that. I was pinned down, hurt, and panicking when I yelled at him. I had no way of knowing what the cougar would do. But I also can't change the order of it. Devin had already gotten me away from that animal once. The second time, I was on the ground yelling at him to come closer and use the spray. And he did. I got free when it went for him. This is the hardest story because there is a fact in it that refuses to become emotionally comfortable. Devin came closer because his injured coworker told him to. That does not mean the narrator caused Devin's death in any simple sense. He was pinned under a cougar, hurt, panicking, and asking for the one tool they had that might get the animal off him. Come closer and spray it is completely understandable from the ground. It is also, in retrospect, the sentence he cannot stop replaying. And this is where hindsight becomes almost cruelly efficient. After an event, we can freeze every frame. We know the cougar switched targets, we know Devin closed the distance, we know the narrator survived. So the change starts to look clean, almost mathematical. But it was not clean while it was happening. Devin did not know the animal would turn on him. The narrator did not know it either. Even the wildlife officer could only say that moving closer may have changed the cougar's attention. That distinction matters. A possible explanation is not the same thing as a verdict. Still, facts do not become painless just because guilt is complicated. Devon approached to help. The cougar turned. One man got free and the other died. There is no clever conclusion that improves that sequence, and pretending there is would only make the story cheaper. I was a student at Utah Valley University when this happened. I was in Slate Canyon for a class, basically doing field notes on exposed rock. It wasn't a serious hike, and I wasn't way out in the backcountry or anything. We'd go along the main trail, and if I saw a decent exposed section nearby, I'd step off for a bit, write down what I needed, then get back on the trail. That's what I was doing that day. I'd gone a short distance below the trail onto this dry, rocky slope because there was an outcrop I wanted to look at. Closer to the trail, the ground was pretty solid. Lower down, it turned into smaller, loose rock, the kind that moves under your shoes if you put your weight down wrong. I noticed it, but only in the normal way you notice footing while you're walking. It didn't seem important. I crouched down by the rock and started writing in my little field notebook. I was looking down at the page when I caught movement farther down the slope. At first, I thought it was another person, or I guess I just registered movement before I registered what it was. Then I looked properly and saw a young moose below me. It wasn't right next to me, but it was close enough that I immediately stopped writing. I wasn't scared yet. My thought was more, okay, cool, I should leave that alone and get back to the trail. I had no reason to be anywhere near it, and I definitely wasn't trying to get closer. So I stood up and turned back toward where I'd come from, and the adult moose was uphill from me. She was above me and a little off to one side, basically on the side I needed to use to get back toward the trail. I remember looking down at the calf, then back up at her, and feeling kind of stupid, because the problem was suddenly very obvious. I didn't know much about moose behavior. I still don't, really. But I knew enough to understand that the calf was below me, the adult was above me, and I had somehow walked into the space between them without even knowing she was there. For a second, I just stood there, because my brain was still stuck on the most obvious option, which was to go back the way I came. I could see the trail uphill and a little behind me. It wasn't far, so I started taking a couple of steps that way, mostly because I hadn't really come up with another plan yet. The adult moved, too. She didn't charge me. I want to be clear about that because every time I've told this story, that's the part people seem to picture. There wasn't some big movie moment where she put her head down and came flying at me. She just started walking downhill toward me in a very steady, direct way. That was plenty. I stopped. Up close, or closer than I wanted anyway, she looked huge. I had no clue what distance was safe, what she was going to do, or whether she was just trying to get past me. I wasn't standing there analyzing her ears or posture or anything. My whole thought process was basically, I'm in the wrong spot. She's coming this way, move somewhere else. So instead of going toward the trail, I turned downhill and across the slope. I figured if I moved off to the side fast enough, I'd get out of her way, and that would probably solve it. My right boot hit the looser rock and slid with it. Not a huge slide, but enough that my weight went out from under me, and I had to throw my other foot down and catch myself with one hand. For a second, I was sort of half sitting on the slope, trying not to keep going. The little rocks under my boot just kept shifting. When I tried to push against them, I got myself upright again and looked back uphill. The moose was closer than before. I wasn't injured or anything, but that one stupid slip changed the situation, because now I knew I couldn't just sprint downhill and be done with it. The slope wasn't insanely steep, but on that loose stuff, I didn't trust myself to move fast without ending up on my ass or sliding farther than I meant to. So I stopped trying to fix everything in one move. Going straight back to the trail meant going toward the adult. Going quickly downhill had just shown me what that was going to be like. I didn't know if she was going to keep coming closer, but I really did not want to figure that out while I was scrambling around on loose rock. I stayed still for a few seconds and looked around properly. She was uphill and a little behind me now, The trail was farther beyond her side, so I crossed that off for the moment. The calf was still downhill, more toward the opposite side. I was mostly looking at the ground by then, honestly, because whatever I did next had to start with not slipping again. Off to one side, a little higher across the slope, there were a few bigger rocks, with patches of ground around them that looked more solid. It wasn't a route back to the trail. If anything, it took me farther across the hillside, but I wouldn't have to walk toward the adult, and I also wouldn't have to keep dropping down through the loose rock. That seemed like the least bad option, so I started moving that way. Very slowly this time. I'd take a short step, put my weight on it, make sure the ground held, then take another. Every few steps I'd glance uphill, so I still knew where the adult was. I wasn't trying to figure out her mood. I wouldn't have known what I was looking at anyway. I just wanted to know if she was getting closer while I moved. At some point, I realized I was still holding the notebook. That's one of the dumb little things I remember most clearly. I had this notebook in one hand while I was trying to balance on the slope, and I actually got annoyed with myself for still having it. I shoved it into my pocket so I could use both arms for balance. The whole thing was awkward like that. I was scared, obviously, but there was also this stupid practical part of my brain going, okay, foot there, don't lean too far, don't step on that patch, check where she is. I didn't have some big survival response. I was just trying not to make the situation worse again. The slope itself wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a cliff. It was just loose enough that if I leaned downhill, the small rock shifted under my boots, and if I tried to turn sharply uphill, I had to load one leg more than I wanted. So I kept using that diagonal line toward the bigger rocks, because I could see places between them where the ground looked packed down. A couple of times I stopped completely, because I genuinely wasn't sure whether I was improving anything. I'd look uphill, then down toward the calf, then back at where I was trying to put my next foot. I couldn't see some obvious safe path. I could just see a few choices that looked bad, and one that looked slightly less bad. By then, I had stopped thinking about getting back to the trail. That could wait. My plan, if you can even call it a plan, was basically three things. Don't move toward the adult, don't lose my footing again, and keep working sideways until I wasn't sitting in the middle of the two animals. So I kept going diagonally across the slope, in short steps. As I moved toward the larger rocks, I gained a little bit of height without turning back toward the trail. The calf was still below me, but after a while, it wasn't directly downhill from where I was anymore. It was farther off to one side. The adult was still moving at first, and that was enough to keep me from getting clever and trying to cut back toward the trail too early. I reached the first of the bigger rocks and finally had something near me that didn't shift when I put my weight down. I stepped around it onto a patch of packed dirt and smaller stones, and it felt a lot better under my boots. I was still testing my steps before fully committing to them, though. I had already tried moving fast once, and that had been enough for me. When I looked uphill again, I expected the adult to be closer. She wasn't. I honestly thought at first that maybe I had just judged the distance wrong. I moved a little farther on the same diagonal, stopped, and checked again. She still wasn't coming closer. I didn't suddenly think, great, problem solved. For all I knew, she had just paused. So I kept moving across the firmer ground and tried to give both of them more room. By that point, the calf was clearly off to my lower side instead of more or less behind me, which was the first thing that made me think I might actually be getting out of the bad position I'd put myself in. A little farther on, I saw the adult turn downhill and start moving toward the calf. I watched just long enough to make sure I wasn't imagining that, then went back to watching where I was stepping. There was no charge, no last-second rush, nothing like that. I kept moving along the more stable ground until there was more distance between me and both animals. I still didn't go straight back to the trail. To do that right away, I would have had to cut back across the same side of the slope while she was moving down toward the calf, and I wasn't confident enough in my read of the situation to test it, so I stayed higher for a bit and let her go down. Once I had enough separation, I took the longer way across the upper part of the slope and worked my way back toward the main trail from there. I could still tell roughly where the animals were, but I wasn't hanging around watching them. I just wanted to get back onto decent footing and be done. And that was basically it. They didn't follow me, I didn't run into them again farther up the trail. There wasn't another close call afterward. Looking back, the part I'm confident about is pretty simple. By the time I noticed the calf, I had already walked into a spot between it and the adult without realizing she was above me. I don't know what she would have done if I had kept heading toward her, and I'm not going to pretend I knew some proper moose technique in the moment, because I didn't. My first idea was bad. My second idea nearly dumped me onto the slope, because I tried to move too fast. After that, I just stopped trying to be quick about it, and kept choosing the direction that looked less likely to put me closer to her, or send me sliding downhill. Once I made it back to the trail, I mostly just felt stupid and relieved. I'd managed to put myself in exactly the wrong place without even realizing it, and getting myself off to the side was enough to end it. The moose story is almost a perfect demonstration of how quickly a simple plan can become useless. Step 1, see the calf and go back to the trail. Reasonable, except the adult is standing between you and the trail. Step 2, move downhill and get out of the way quickly. Also reasonable, except the slope is loose enough that speed nearly puts you on the ground. So by the third decision, the narrator finally stops trying to solve the whole problem at once. That is the important shift. He does not suddenly become a wildlife expert. He does not decode the moose's body language or remember some perfect survival rule. He reduces the problem. Do not move toward the adult. Do not move toward the calf. Do not fall. Find firmer ground, repeat. It sounds almost embarrassingly basic, but basic is useful when your first two ideas have already failed. There is also something very realistic about the notebook still being in his hand. People imagine emergencies as moments of total clarity. In reality, the brain often keeps carrying some absurd leftover from the previous 5 minutes while trying to handle the new situation. He gets out not because he discovers a brilliant escape route, but because he stops demanding one. A series of less bad choices creates enough distance for the situation to end on its own. All 4 stories have something in common, and it is not simply that nature is dangerous. That would be an easy conclusion and not a very useful one. Stairs are dangerous if you make the right mistake on them. The interesting point is that every story begins with a model of the situation that feels complete, and then reality removes one piece. The camp is abandoned. Except it is not. The ground is solid. The spray is the solution. Except getting it into range creates another risk. The trail is the escape route. Except the animal is standing on that side. This is how people get into trouble. Not because they know nothing, but because they know one thing with slightly too much confidence. And after that, the next decision matters more than defending the previous one. The fisherman does not stay to prove he was right about the camp. The Yellowstone worker does not let one victim become 2. The student with the moose stops trying to move fast after speed fails. Even in the cougar story, where there is no clean outcome, the surviving worker does the only practical thing left, gets distance, finds the radio, and calls for help. There is a temptation to turn these stories into rules. Never enter an empty building, never step off a boardwalk, never approach a predator, never get between an adult animal and its young. But the larger lesson is less comfortable. Your first explanation may be wrong. A place that looks empty may only be empty while you are looking at it. A safe-looking surface may be a shell. A rescue attempt can create another casualty. The shortest route out can be the route you should not take. So the takeaway is not paranoia. It is the willingness to update quickly. When new information destroys the plan, abandon the plan before the plan destroys you. And with that, we're done for today. If you have a story where one small detail changed an ordinary situation, send it in. I'll see you in the next video.